Tag TV and Tag Radio be seen and heard by both technology users and technology producers throughout the state of Georgia and around the world. Low cost, big benefits, powerhouse online branded video and audio has arrived. Tag TV, Tag Radio, there's a lot more to know. This edition of Tech Talk is brought to you by GlobalSpeak.com, new media consultants, corporate video and audio communications, video and audio production and distribution, live and virtual event production. Tag TV and Tag Radio is a service of GlobalSpeak.com, creatively delivering powerful marketing, video, and audio solutions. From political food fights to Hollywood's latest train wrecks, the average consumer's up-to-the-second content demands, well, they're virtually impossible for a single content aggregator to keep up with. Or are they? What if your product, service, or business could become the point of discovery for all the web's best content? That's right, your brand, instead of Google, Facebook, and Twitter. Greetings, everyone. It's Tuesday, September 25th, 2012, and this is Tech Talk with Technology Association of Georgia President Tino Mantella. I'm your guest host, Frank Baia. Up to the Tech Talk, the subject turns to content logistics. That's right, the competitive empowerment of any brand to become online publishers to grow their businesses. Not just another content aggregator struggling to be relevant, your website and online marketing as the point of discovery for the web's best content. How can it be done? Enter Vertical Acuity, the world's first content logistics platform that empowers online publishers by discovering, organizing, and publishing content to and from thousands of sites across the web while monetizing content by digital publishers. Meet an Atlanta-based technology executive with nearly 20 years of leading innovative and transformative company leadership, Gregg Freishtat, founder of Vertical Acuity. Former Senior Vice President of Internet Strategy for Premier Technology, he also served as Chairman of Vertical One Corporation, the first provider of web-based account aggregation services. He remained in that role after the company was sold to S1. Earlier, Gregg founded and served as CEO of Telex, which later was sold to P-Tech in 1996, enabling intelligent, frictionless, mass-scale digital curation and partner management that shifts revenues from search engines and social networks to publishers and content owners. Content logistics. Is it a game changer in the digital media world? Find out as we Tech Talk Content Logistics with thought leader, industry expert, and founder of Vertical Acuity, Gregg Freishtat, Chief Executive Officer. Gregg, welcome to Tech Talk.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we get an opportunity every once in a while to really get into the brains, the experience, the background of a subject matter expert like you that has been involved in the evolution as much as an advocate of the change as they are a catalyst that's been involved in change. But let's take advantage of the opportunity and let's talk a little bit about marketing. You know, in the day, we used to talk about reach and frequency. We used to talk about push and pull. Now we're talking about product and audience engagement, inbound and outbound. Let's start with a little bit of a perspective in terms of your experience. What have you seen in terms of changes over the last few years?
Yeah, I think there's some rather profound changes going on in the challenges that a marketer has in finding a very fragmented audience, and perhaps most importantly in interacting with a consumer who knows that by hitting the back button on their browser at any moment, they can end up on their Google results page and find any piece of information about anything. So really the import and the change of consumer expectations is at the heart of this change that's going on in the marketplace, and which creates some really difficult challenges for the online marketer.
Now, one of the things, as you point out, I guess, is the radical change in terms of audience engagement. You know, as I mentioned earlier, traditional marketing, we used to talk about reach and frequency. Now I guess it's demassification. I mean, it's a form of advanced profiling where you have a gut sensitivity. Heck, not even a gut. What you have is analytics so that you're dealing with an audience that may be smaller, but one that's a lot more intensely involved in the selling message.
Yeah, I think that the science is important, but I think that the macro change is this shift from product marketing to what we call audience marketing or engagement marketing. Whereas it used to be, the marketer would talk about their product because they could do so over print, radio, and television and have a very captive audience. So when you hear the words quicker, picker, upper, that's Bounty paper towels. They're the quicker, picker, upper. And you could say that over and over and over and over, which is your reach, frequency, and duration. And indeed, that's what marketers used to get paid for. But when you go online and you're confronted with a Facebook account, a Twitter account, LinkedIn, landing pages, email marketing, you can't say quicker, picker, upper over and over again. It won't work because you can't talk necessarily about your product to the audience. Rather, you need to talk to the audience about what's important to them. A great example would be creating an article or finding an article about how to get a red wine stain out of a white rug. And you put that out there really to create a relationship, because in the new world of marketing, you're trying to do relationship marketing so that when someone is ready to buy and they're walking down the aisle of the supermarket, they choose to buy from you. And it's a subtle but very fundamental shift in the challenges that marketers face in having to create content constantly to feed this insatiable appetite of the consumer, especially since the consumer knows they can find this content anywhere on the web that they want. So that's a real challenge for marketers.
Kind of an ironic comment when you talk about the fact of the importance of building relationships, and yet most of the relationships, in fact, probably all of them are virtual. I guess the whole concept of one of the things that you hear a lot talked about is the fact that information is on overload, and that really the issue is attention, the battle of making sure that your message gets out. So I guess when you talk about this relationship establishment, relationship building, it's a long process. It's not something that you can, we used to say you had to buy a market or earn a market, and in this day and age, I guess you have to earn it.
Well, I think you do have to earn it, and it's hard to talk too broadly because different companies have different challenges. Large companies, Fortune 100, Fortune 1000 companies really look at lifetime relationships, or they hope to have lifetime relationships. So if you want to have a retention and loyalty program, you're going to have a very consistent touch to your consumers. And you're going to have to use those analytics that you mentioned earlier to figure out which consumers like getting emails once a week, which consumers prefer to get emails once a day. Some consumers don't like email at all, but love to have interesting materials show up on their Facebook wall. So it is an ongoing process, and it is a very different process than of the last, say, 50 years of offline marketing. And it's still very new. I mean, it's only in the last couple of years that the percentage of marketing budgets spent online has crossed 20-25%. So even as we sit here today, the lion's share of the marketing budgets in this country are still spent offline. As that shifts, it exasperates these problems even more and just creates the importance of strategy and execution for a marketing department.
I mentioned analytics, so there's a whole different way of calculating return on investment. I can remember the old cliche, 50% of my advertising works and 50% of it doesn't. I just don't know which 50% works and which doesn't. In this day and age, I guess it's a case where you pretty well know almost to the point exactly what's working and what's not, and obviously you do more of what's working and do less of what's not, or do you agree with that?
I think that's absolutely correct. Unfortunately, it doesn't solve as much of the problem as you would hope. I think there's a great deal of quantitative analysis that goes on in the marketing department about what is effective and what is not effective. However, what's not effective doesn't necessarily tell you that you need to spend more money on what's working, because right now it's so much turmoil in the marketplace that I think the really smart marketers are continuing to experiment and continuing. So if I have a quarter of my budget in email, on Facebook, a quarter on Twitter, and a quarter on Google AdWords, and I see that Twitter's not working well, that doesn't mean that you allocate all that money to the other three. It means the other three might be performing well, but you need to try something new, whether that's one-on-one marketing automation, or something like what we're working on where it's more of a content marketing strategy. So there's a lot of strategy that's required, a lot of learning, and a lot of experimentation that's going to be required for the next 2 or 3 years as this new form of online marketing, whether you call it inbound marketing, content marketing, engagement marketing. It's really all different words to speak to the same fundamental change.
I guess, again, if I'm on the other side, I'm that advertiser, I'm thinking experiment is just one of those words that you just really kind of get your hair up a little bit on your back, and yet there's so much change, and that change is happening so rapidly. Now, depending on what particular article or what blog or what media you've been listening to, certainly one of the hot items is Google's concept in terms of moment of truth, and the idea that you can impact a decision as the decision is actually being made with some form of a message that, in effect, changes the scenario by way of the offer or the opportunity right at the moment of purchase. There's so many aspects of it and so many layers, and I get it. I was going to say layers and tentacles. I guess it's like you're saying that dependent on your strategy, depending on your budget, depending on your product, your vertical, there's a lot of different variations of how you might approach the situation. One of the things I know that I'd love to hear a lot about, and I think our listeners would too, is the content strategy. You guys are developing a whole different attitude, a different way of doing it. Tell us a little bit about, I think, what you call Scribit.
Yeah. Scribit is it's a fairly new platform that we launched over the summer. And it really just looks at, again, the same fundamental challenge. The first challenge the marketer has is to decide I'm going to be marketing online, and then they have to really pick their core platform. So there's something called marketing automation, which grew out of email. Actually, here in Atlanta, there's a couple of prominent companies, Pardot and Silverpop, fit into that space. And then there's CRM, how do I measure my leads, which is Salesforce.com and Microsoft Dynamics. And there's a number of other platforms like Vitru and Buddy Media that deal with how do I engage with Facebook and Twitter effectively. And all of this is what we consider to be infrastructure. And it's the first generation of technologies that allow marketers to find, interact, measure, and iterate their messages to their consumers. And all that's been, growing up over the past 3 to 4 years. At Scribit, we look at that being as the ante to get into the game, and the real challenge is that the marketer wakes up every day and has to say something, and they have to say something fresh, compelling, current, and new. And the challenge of creating all of that content organically is really twofold. Number one, it's very time-consuming and slow, and number two, it can never keep up with consumer expectations. So what we've done is we've gone out and collected about 150 of the best publishers online, created licensing agreements with them. So you can come into Scribit, you can find a great article from Inc. or Forbes or Discovery or any number of our publishers ranging from the Daily Meal to Gawker to Forbes, and instantly use that content out in Facebook and Twitter and emails, but when your audience clicks on it, they don't go back to Forbes or Inc., rather they're directed to the brand marketer's site. So this is, when people talk about content, they talked about, owned and earned and paid, and we think of our content as leased. So you're able to access, millions and millions of top-name branded content for use in your marketing strategy without having to go through the time and expense of creating everything yourself.
I think obviously if you're in that game, and one of the things that I've heard about content origination centers and distribution platforms and even channels that a lot of companies and corporations try to develop in order to do what you're talking about, their biggest fear is that it's a black hole. That how do you support this? How do you continually get fresh content? Obviously, this really solves that problem, certainly brings a lot to solving that problem. Maybe give us a little bit, although I would think it's pretty broad in terms of who needs Scribit, maybe cite a couple of actual examples of how that could be leveraged by a particular industry, particular vertical.
Yeah, so I think you're right in that it's very broad and diverse. We have people that are as small as, solo practitioner dentists who, quite frankly, I was shocked. I go to the dentist, I say, why did you sign up? They said, well, people really don't want to come to the dentist, and I can't keep sending them these reminders of, come get your teeth cleaned, you're going to get cavities, but rather I could send them a neat note, an article from Glamour magazine about a beautiful smile, or I could send them a note about a movie star who had to get a crown because they didn't go to the dentist for 3 years. So using content not just to talk talk about your product, but to create awareness and to create visibility with your potential audience.
Going back to that relationship thing that you were talking about before.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And then on the other side, we have some large financial institutions that, quite frankly, if they're trying to sell a hedge on the euro, they could send out their analyst report every morning that says the euro's going in a tank. But when they find a Forbes article that talks about the long-term risks of the euro, that's a very different thing to the consumer. Because what the financial institution says about the market itself, when it's the one trying to get you to believe it to sell a product, is one thing. But when you're able to use independent, credible third-party content in your relationship with the consumer, it's just a different piece of the stack. So, if you're a marketer, you can think of the world as having three types of content. And quite frankly, we think they're all important. We don't think that Scribbit replaces them. We think that different companies need different pieces of content for different purposes. And the top of the stack is the companies that can afford to create great homegrown content. It's delivered for a very specific purpose. It has great SEO benefits. We really think that if you can afford to create it, even if it's only a couple of pieces a month, very valuable for your marketing. And the second piece is that there's companies out there like Content Launch and Zares and Scripted, where they have networks of writers that is much less expensive, and you can get more content, not quite as good, but it's a piece of the ecosystem. And then you have Scribbit, and Scribbit, another great example is we were talking to a large car company, and the car company said, we have writers, we have all the content we want. And it was right when Isaac was about to come ashore, and I said, yeah, but do you have an article on how to hurricane-proof your car? Because that's what the people down on the coast really want to read. So they're all, very important pieces of the ecosystem, and each company, again, needs to figure out their own strategy.
Pretty fascinating stuff. How do you get started if you're interested in getting involved?
Oh, you just go to Scribbit, SCRIBIT.com, and we offer a free limited trial so people can get their hands on the product and make sure it does everything we say it does, and it's a very simple process to get started.
I'll tell you that these are, one of the things that I think we all agree with is that it's no time to do anything by yourself. You really need to find the kind of experts that you can associate with that are going to augment your capabilities, your core competencies, and certainly you can't keep up with everything that there is out there to keep up with. And I think obviously you sound like you've got a winner here. One thing for sure, and that is, Gregg, thank you so much for taking time out of what I'm sure is an extremely busy schedule to join us today on Tech Talk.
Well, it's my pleasure, and thanks for having me.